Hello everyone, Mr. Renfro here with for the 6th and 7th graders, week 1 of our unit on discipleship for confirmation class. Today is Sunday, the 27th of September. Just to remind you guys, so there's basically in confirmation class over 2 years, 6th and 7th grade, there are 6 units. So year 1, which the 7th graders just finished last year, is the Bible and the Creed and the life and ministry of Jesus. And we're entering into year 2 now. This is sort of the first year for the 6th graders and the second year of this 6-unit cycle, and it's discipleship and other beliefs, and then a unit called Tough Questions, which is kind of a catch-all that has a dozen lessons in it about all sorts of stuff. And by the time you get finished with 7th grade, you've had all of those. So we're starting the unit on discipleship this morning. And this really goes to, one of the main things that I'm trying to do in confirmation class. You might ask yourself, if you're one of the 6th graders, maybe you ask yourself, what is confirmation class for? And the obvious answer is that confirmation class is to prepare you to be able to say for yourself, to affirm the promises that were made for you by your parents in baptism, to take those promises on yourself as a teenager. But there's a couple of subsets to that, and I mean, one of the things that I'm always trying to do is to teach you about the church service itself and what we're doing during that church service. So for those of you that watched the lesson last week, the review lesson, we did a little bit of that last week. This is what's happening when you take communion. This is what's happening when a baby gets baptized. When we say the creed, this is what we're doing. That sort of thing. Everybody in our church who is a teenager ought to understand all of the things that are going on during the church services, because they have all had this class. But one of the other things that confirmation class is trying to do, and that I'm trying to do, and that this unit really gets to, is to discuss why it is we even go to church. I mean, it's what historians call the so what question. So what? And the title of today's lesson is, why should I follow Jesus? Can't I just say that I believe in him? Isn't it enough to simply say, yeah, I believe that Jesus exists, and so what? And yet we have all of these other things that we do here in church. Why is that? And so let's talk a little bit about the word discipleship. What does it mean to be a disciple? And if we were all sitting around the table in class together, we would take some time with this word and kind of play with it and write it out on the board and see what other sorts of English words it might look like. For instance, the word discipline, right? So it's the same root word, and everybody knows that if your parents discipline you, that means that they're punishing you or they're trying to get you to do a certain thing. Discipline can also be a noun, so a discipline is a certain way of doing something. You guys know that I am a historian, so the study of history is a discipline. That means that I was trained in a certain way. I went through a certain number of classes. I went through a certain number of steps, and I learned how to ask important questions and then answer those questions using historical evidence and make an argument one way or another about something. And it's all done in a certain way, and it's called a discipline because you do things following a certain set of procedures. So if you call someone a disciple, then that means that they are following a certain path that is set out for them by someone else. And of course, in our case, the someone else is Jesus, the life and ministry of Jesus. And he invites us to be disciples, not just believers. Anybody can say, I believe in God. And in fact, most people will profess some sort of belief in God. But what they do with that belief is the question in this unit, right? So let's look at a Bible verse. As we always do in each of these lessons, there's usually a text that's associated with it. And the text today is Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 through 20. So now is your opportunity to take a second. If you need to pause me and go find a Bible, please do that. But take a second and find Matthew chapter 4. Matthew is the first book of the New Testament, so fairly easy to find. And chapter 4, verses 18 and 20. Now, this is at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. Starting at verse 18. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and his brother John, and they were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets, and Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father, and they followed him. Now, let's unpack this a little bit. This is a fairly simple story, but let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. So here you have these fishermen that are working, and here comes this sort of new preacher named Jesus. And this takes place at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. In fact, in Matthew, we're 4 chapters into Matthew, right? So there's been Matthew has the whole story of Christmas and being born in a stable and the stars and the angels and that sort of stuff, and then eventually we get into Jesus being baptized, and then his ministry starts. Some of the other gospels, I mean, Mark is like, this is the beginning of the story. Jesus just shows up and it's like, hey, would you like to be my disciple? So put yourself in the shoes of these fishermen. Jesus doesn't just walk up to them and say, I'd like you to believe in me. All right? Because as a matter of fact, at this time, the disciples didn't believe in him. There was nothing to believe in. Jesus' earthly ministry hadn't started yet. No, he said, come and follow me. And so they had to stop what they were doing. And again, this is ancient Israel. So there isn't unemployment insurance, and there aren't bank accounts, and there aren't Social Security, and there aren't food banks and places where you can go get a meal. There, you either work and you produce something, or you end up sitting outside the temple with your hand out, hoping somebody will give you a coin. Those are your two choices in ancient times, right? So these guys have nothing to fall back on. And so think about what an act of faith it was for them to essentially leave their work and to follow Jesus, and to follow him. Eventually they follow him through his death and his resurrection and into a ministry of their own. And then for most of these guys, eventually their own deaths, because they were followers of Christ. They followed him to the very end. So again, the active verb here is to follow. So in much the same way that Jesus invited the disciples to follow him, and they did, really not knowing what they were getting into, but trusting enough in Jesus that he had a plan and the way and had something that they wanted, and they were willing to follow him to see what that was and to figure out what that was and to have it. And Jesus invites us to have that same relationship with him that he had with their disciples. Later on in Matthew, Jesus tells his disciples as he's preparing to depart and go back to heaven. So this is after the crucifixion and the resurrection. Jesus says to his disciples, well, you know what, let's go find the verse and read it ourselves rather than me just telling it to you. So this, Jeffrey, I'm busy. Soon. This is in Matthew chapter 28. So we're already in Matthew. Pretty easy. Just go to the end, okay? Because 28 is the last chapter. And the last paragraph of Matthew says, Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples." Notice the use of that word, right? He doesn't say go and make believers. He doesn't say go and sort of tell people about me and see whether or not they'll think I'm okay. He doesn't use words like that. It's a very specific word here. It says, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." So um, this is often called the Great Commission. So a commission is like being told to do something. And when you're an officer in the Navy, like I was, you receive a commission. It makes me a commissioned officer. It says basically, go out and do this. And here Jesus is, telling his disciples, go out and do this. He's giving them this commission, and it's to make other followers like them. So what are we talking about following, right? That is really going to be what we discuss over the next 3 or 4 lessons. Well, really, it's what we discuss all the time. But over the next 3 or 4 lessons, we're going to be talking about what is this following, because in our church and in our corporate life together as a church body, it's not simply enough to say, I believe in God, or I believe in Jesus. But we're being challenged. We're challenged by Jesus here in the Bible, and we're also challenged by each other in church, in our life as a church, to follow the example that Jesus set for us and the commandments that he gave to us. And it invites us to act in a certain way. Michael, take that upstairs to Mom, please. I'm busy right now.
I think this is one of Jeffrey's.
Yeah, take it to Mom. Thank you. Yes, I'm aware that Jeffrey wants to go to the doctor. So, sorry, everyone. Yeah, the Renfro household keeps going, even when Dad is trying to steal a couple of minutes to film this lesson here. But the for instance, the other thing I wanted to bring up is that you can see in our church different ways that, particularly adults, but we also invite you guys as teenagers and as kids to be a part of this. Different ways that the adults are trying to do things besides simply go to church once a week and say that we believe in God, right? And if you think of the ways that that happens in our corporate life, all of the various committees that do things, that do outreach to our community, that our Good Neighbors Fund, that provides money and things for people that might need something, or need a bill paid, or need work done to their car and they don't have the money to do that. The ministries that collect backpacks, stuff for children at the beginning of the school year. The ministries at Christmas, where we collect gifts for kids that don't have anything. The ministries to our sister churches in El Salvador and Slovakia, and in um, uh, Madagascar, and so on and so forth. And so all of these things, one of the things that we talk about as we go through confirmation is I invite you to see, rather than just like going to church from 11 to 12 or from 8:30 to 9:45 on Sunday mornings, I invite you to see all of these things that are going on all throughout the life of the church. The church is so much more than simply church services. And I'm gonna teach you about those church services, and you're gonna understand what we're doing in those church services, and they're important, but they're not really what being part of the church is about. It's about so much more. And that is what we mean when we use this term discipleship, or being a disciple of Jesus. It's following this example that Jesus has set for us in our everyday life and in the things in the life of the church. There is Pastor Sean talked about this morning in this morning's service. For those of you that watched it on YouTube or on Facebook, Pastor Sean talked about a a group in our church that's meeting called Living Every Day as Disciples, or LEAD, which is a process that our church is going through right now. And what it's doing is, and Mrs. Renfro is a part of this process, and I think Gotham's mom is a part of the committee also. And what they're doing is looking at ways that we as a congregation, how can we as a congregation act out this discipleship, this being followers of Jesus? What are in our community? What are things that we can do in our community to live more like Jesus and to do things the way he would have done it and to try to act the way he wants us to act as a congregation? What are things that we can provide, that we can do, how we live? All of those things are things that the LEAD committee is looking at as our church goes through this process, living every day as disciples, which is something the Lutheran Church has sort of put together. All right, so I guess what I would say to conclude this lesson then, again, the question is, why should I follow Jesus? Can't I just say that I believe in him? And so what I would say to you is that the answer to that is, well, what if you just said that you believed in Jesus and then did nothing else? And then just went on about life the way you usually would, and there wasn't any Gloria Dei, and our church wasn't there, and we didn't meet together every Sunday, and we didn't do all of these other things that I've just finished talking about. And not only just us, but that there weren't any other Christian churches, and none of these churches did any of these ministries that you see on a daily basis, all over the country and all over the world. What if none of that existed? What if simply the only message that Jesus had for us was, look, I created everything, and I would really like it if you guys would believe in me. And everybody said, oh, I really believe in you. And that was the end of it. Think about that for a minute. What would that look like? Then what good would it do, right? Could God force us all to believe in him? Sure, right? God, we'll have a unit where we talk about the nature of God. I'll give you a hint. God essentially can do whatever God wants. So God has chosen not to have that kind of relationship with us. God has chosen not to force us all to believe in God or to follow the things that God wants us to do. God has given us an opportunity to make those choices for ourselves. And God does that so that we can have this richer, fuller experience for ourselves and in our relationship with God and with others. So think about what the church would look like if the only thing to go in, if there was no churches at all, or if you just sort of went to church and you met for an hour and you went home, and that was all there was to it. Then you might be asking yourself right about now, what benefit would there be to me to be a part of that? What benefit would there be to others for that to even exist? Why would we do that? Right? So one of the things that I'm trying to get you to see in confirmation class is that it is about so much more than just the church services. It is about all of the work. The Lutheran Church talks about God's work in our hands, right? So all of the work that God is doing in the world and that God is using God's people, us, to carry that work out. And so in much the same way that God used his disciples, like we read in our story here at the beginning of the lesson, right, in Matthew, Jesus comes up to these folks and he says, follow me. And what he's saying to them, he's not just saying, hey, here I am, what do you think? Do you believe in me or not? No, he is asking for a commitment. He is asking for them to follow him, to act the way that he acts, and to learn to do the things that he does, and to carry on his work after he leaves. And Jesus asks each and every one of us, the same exact question that we see in Matthew 4. Will you come and follow me? Okay? So we in confirmation class are going to spend the next several weeks sort of working on that some more. This is the opening lesson, introductory lesson. We're going to get a little bit deeper into this over the next few weeks to talk about what this following Christ looks like. All right? So for those of you tuning in on your phones or your iPads or your computers or whatever, I thank you for your time. I try to keep these videos between about 20 and 30 minutes. They're not, shouldn't be too hard to watch. Um, and I miss you guys as always. I certainly wish that we were meeting together in the confirmation classroom, and I look forward to the time when we can all get back together as a class so that you guys can ask me questions and I can answer them, and we can look up Bible verses together and have a little bit more of an exchange and a dialogue than just me kind of staring at this computer screen. But at least we will, start working our way through the lessons until that time comes that we can meet together in person. All right. So until next week, I hope you guys have a great week. I hope you enjoy your Monday off of school, and I will talk to you next Sunday. Bye-bye.